before we get started, I'd like to tell you my name is Chris, and I am the product manager for the Flutter developer experience. And with me is Matt, who is the lead for Flutter developer relations team. And it's our job today to tell you about Flutter from a developer point of view. Now, before we get into that, let me ask, how many of you are developers in the room? Excellent. I don't see any managers. That means we can make fun of them. All right. So what is Flutter? Let's start there. Flutter is a new UI toolkit from Google. And its job is to help developers, you folks, build quick apps of high quality and high performance. And to do it across multiple platforms and target them natively. That's the job of Flutter. And so our job is to tell you about that. But before we tell you about that, Matt is going to show you how it actually works. Matt?
Most of you are developers, so you'll be able to spot the mistakes that I make. So we're at MWC. I want to spend 15, 20 minutes just showing you the developer experience for Flutter. This is not to teach you how to build Flutter apps. This is just to give you a flavor for what it's like to build an app. So I'm going to go through stuff pretty quickly. And anyone who wants to come up and ask specific questions afterwards or during the breaks or whatever, please feel free to. I'm more than happy to ask questions. So the first thing that was on my mind was, what am I going to start to code on stage? And I figured since this is Mobile World Congress, it would be nice to build something that made phone calls, because that kind of makes sense. So I'm going to see if I can, in the next 19 and a half minutes or less, put together a phone dialer. Now, I usually do this with an Android phone hooked up to my Mac. Today I'm going to use an iPhone, and this is a real phone. This is QuickTime doing an actual cast. So everything you see here is happening on a real device. And everything that I do today, I've tested and works equally well on an Android handset. So I thought I'd shake things up today. So first off, how many of you have actually written some Flutter before? Okay, a few. So some of this will be old hat to you, but hopefully there'll be some interesting things here. Everybody has been talking about hot reload and how it makes their lives easier. So I have the world's simplest app on here, which is basically some center text which says effectively hello world. And if you get one thing from today, is that everything about UI and positioning in Flutter is about building widgets. So I'm going to be building and playing with a lot of widgets. So when I talk about widgets, they're just the components that I'm going to do. So I have hello MVC. Let's change that and say hello from Flutter. And there we go. Martin promised you 200 millisecond hot reload time. I'm afraid my laptop only managed 751. But I got a lot of stuff running in this. So hopefully that's still sub-second, so that's pretty good. So there you go, hot reload. I made a change. Not super impressive because I just changed the text. I can go in here, and I have done a little bit of theming on here. So as you can see, my colors for my text are green, so maybe I can make that dark blue. And there we go. That's faded to dark blue. The text is a little big for what I want to do, so let me drop that down some size. And there we go. Okay, so I'm already starting to play around with it, and this is all well and good, but this is like, hello world, and we're 2.5 minutes into the demo. Let's actually do something more interesting. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create my first widget. So I'm going to go and I'm going to create a stateless widget, and I'm going to call it my dialer, because I'm going to be building a dialer. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to start with, what does every dialer have? It has some buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a digit button that I created, and this takes a character. So I can give it 1. This isn't going to do anything because I'm not using my widget yet. So let's take out this text, and let's use my dialer instead. And so there we go. Wow, magnificent. He's made a button. That's really exciting. It actually works. There's the button being clicked. But I don't need one button. I need several buttons. So how do you do that in Flutter? Bunch of different ways you can do it. Let's add a second button and see how we get on. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to use some of the tooling that we've built into, I'm using Visual Studio Code, Android Studio, and IntelliJ. We have some really awesome tooling for that as well. I'm just going to make use of this liberally throughout. So I'm going to create a column. I'm going to take my digit button, and I'm going to replicate it. And I'm going to put in a 2. And now I have 2 buttons. Great. And they're way at the top of the screen, and that's kind of lame. So I'm going to tell my column to lay out in the center. There we go. OK, so now I have 2 clickable buttons. Maybe I don't want them vertically. Maybe I want them horizontally. So maybe I can change this to a row. There we go. So you're seeing a couple of uses here. I'm using widgets to create actual elements of UI, and I'm also using widgets to lay everything out. I'm doing everything through code. There's no underlying layout language being used here, and it allows me to iterate really, really quickly. So this is great, but what I really need is I need something like 16, 17 buttons, and I need to do them really quickly because you don't want to see me code buttons all day. So I'm going to create the stateless widget and call it my numpad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a table. And a table is going to let me lay things out table style. Now, I can hover over and see what it is. One of the nice things about Flutter, everything's written in Dart, so I can actually go into the documentation, and I can read the documentation in my IDE. I can actually see the source code for implementing a table, which has got a lot of complicated stuff in it. But the nice thing is I can always dive in and see how things work under the hood, and I can use them. So I've got a table. A table here takes children, which are a bunch of table rows. So let's give this some children, and that's going to be another list. And these take a table row. Oops, too much coffee. I should have not had my 4th cup 10 minutes ago. Great, OK, so Twitch. Table row takes more children, which are just widgets. So let's go in here, and let's give this some children. And in here, I am going to create a map. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just going to give this a few digits. Let's say 1, 2, 3. And all this is doing is a little bit of fancy programming to map those characters to some digit buttons. This is great. Nothing's happening in screen. Everyone's bored at this point. So let's just get rid of these, and we'll keep our let's change this back to column. And I'm going to get rid of these that are on screen. I'm going to put in my numpad. OK, right. OK, so now we're getting somewhere. We have a row, and we have these. So let's replicate this a couple of times. 2, 3. And then we will watch with anticipation as I cannot count at all. There we go. 7, 8, 9. This is so exciting. I should have done this prepped earlier. And hash. And we're done. Yes, there we go. OK, so we have a numpad. It's not that exciting, I know, but it's getting places. It's a little spread out because this is an iPhone X and it's super stretchy. So I will unstretchify that by wrapping this in a little bit of padding. And let's give that 25, say, and that's going to shrink it down a bit. Cool. OK, so that's not bad. 7 minutes in, and we actually have some buttons. What are we going to do next? Let's show what those buttons are actually typing. So I'm going to put a new widget in, and I created a readout widget. And I'm just going to drop that in. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. One is I've used a pre-built widget. And secondly, they're the numbers that I've been typing in since we began. And this is the example, again, of stateful hot reload. I was hitting those buttons. The state was being recorded. And even though it's constantly reloading the UI, that is still there. And just to prove it, there we go. Even the delete key works. So that's cool. So now we have a readout, which is nice. We kind of need a button to actually dial something. So there's a simple dial button here. OK, and now we have the basics of a dialer. That's kind of cool. But, you know, I kind of did some cheating by I pre-prepared this readout and these dial buttons. So let's take a quick look under the hood just to show you that there's no real magic here. So here's a few widgets I created earlier. And here's my number readout one. And it's got a little bit of stuff in there in terms of setting margins, in terms of playing around with nice curvy borders. So let's play around with a couple of these just to show that it's fairly easy to modify. The first is we have this nice delete button. I can go into my delete button, and you can see there it's an icon for a backspace. I could, you know, change that up a little bit and maybe change it to something different. OK, that's nice. I can play around here. You can see my borders are quite roundy. I can make my borders even more roundy. I can make my borders less roundy. That's nice. Maybe I don't like this 2 or 3 year old style of wrapping everything in a border. Maybe I just want to have it nicely underlined. So I can do that. You can see here I've got some decoration going on, some bordering. So I could change this. Instead of saying border.all, I could just say, hey, just draw the bottom border. And there we go. So okay, playing around with this. This is nice. Where I am way ahead of time. This is great. Chris, you're going to have tons of time to talk after this. But this is pretty white, and it's pretty minimal, and that's nice, but maybe we want a little bit more color in there. What could I mix into this? So let's go back, and here's the code that I've written so far. I've got a number pad. I've got a dialer. I want to create a new look dialer, so I'm going to create a new widget, and I'm going to call this my fancy dialer, because it's going to be fancier. And I can't spell dialer. That's fine. Okay, so let's just start with, I want to show something in the background. So I'm going to create a stack. And you've seen row, you've seen column, you've seen table. Stack is another way of laying out, except you stack things on top of one another rather than horizontally or vertically. So I'm going to create a stack. The stack is going to take some children, which is going to be a list. And to begin with, I am just going to drop in my dialer, which I just wrote 5 minutes ago, into here, and then I can up here swap out this to my fancy dialer, and absolutely nothing's going to happen because at the moment I'm just showing the same thing before. Now what I want to do is I want to put something in the background. So I'm going to use this handy positioned.fill widget, which is basically going to fill my background. And in here I'm going to put the Flutter logo. And I'm going to get the commas right. There we go. Boom, so we got a Flutter logo in the background. That's pretty ugly. You can't really see what's going on. Will will come up on stage and show you how to build beautiful things. This is not what I do. I build things that are functional. But this is too ugly for my liking. So what I can do here is I can take this Flutter logo, I can wrap it in a new widget, and this one I'm going to give it some transparency. So I can use this opacity widget, and I can set the opacity to, I don't know, say 0, let's say 1/5. Okay, it's not too bad. It's certainly not as eye-gouging as before, but it's still a little white and minimal. So let's add a little bit more color in. So how can I do that? Well, one of the things I can do is, let's say under the opacity, so things are still opaque, but before we render the logo, I'm just going to style up the container that the logo is in. So container takes a handy decoration, and I know for a fact this is called box decoration. And let's have a look. This is a whole bunch of things. I can do borders, and I can do box shapes and shadows, but I'm going to play with a gradient. So let's stick in a gradient, and I'm going to give this a linear gradient. And this is going to require a couple of colors, and I'm going to stick with that dark blue that we had earlier, and I'm then going to make a hideous design choice and blend it into green, because why not? And there we go. Okay, so now we have a bit of color. That's kind of fairly opaque, so if I turn down the transparency a bit, you can see a little better. There we go. That's nice. Don't quite like it going right to left. Maybe I want it to go diagonal, so there's probably something to do that. So let's have a look. Linear gradient, yes, has a begin and an end. And notice that occasionally I'm going in and putting in commas, and that's just to lay things out a little easier so I can drop things in again. This is the tooling at work. So what was I going to do? I was going to say begin, and I was going to align my begin at the top left. There we go. So that has, did that work? It's hard to tell. Let's try bottom right. See if that does something. Ooh, okay, we have a slight issue here, or is it not updating? Let's double check. Oops. Let's see if we can go here and do that. Okay, oh, you know what? My phone's gone to sleep. There we go. I was going to blame Flutter, and it actually turns out it was my phone. And so if we go back to green, and we keep it at bottom right. We're going to have that nice effect, bottom to top. Great. So we have a wonderful UI for a... We have a UI that you may or may not decide is wonderful for dear me, for dialing. Now, does this actually work? Well, we'll see in a second. But what I want to show you is something new in Flutter 1.2, which is before we had some really good debug tools built into Android Studio. It was great, you could do it. Visual Studio Code, not so much. And I'm more of a VS Code, minimal IDE kind of person. So I was sad. But I'm no longer sad, because what I can do is I can start the new DevTools. And in a web browser, it's going to launch a suite of tools that you can use. So you can see this is hooked up to my app right now. I can go in. I can go and see what's my opacity. I can see it's at 0.5. I can check out what's happening with my logo and where it is. I can drop down to... So I can drop in and I can inspect the widget tree easily. I can go in. I can turn on my debug paint to work out how my layout is looking. That's nice. And I can even do the performance overlay. And as I'm using my app, it's actually telling me what my frames per second is. So I'm easily achieving under around 60 frames per second at the moment. So that's really nice. So these are available now, shipping with the beta or 1.2. And you can play around with that, available across all the IDEs we support. So that's nice. So, final test. I actually wrote some code which hooks into the Android and the iOS system for dialing numbers. And being an Android program before, that was easy, and being an iOS, I learned a bit about Swift doing that. But what I did was I effectively created some very lightweight code that's platform specific, and then I built using platform channels, which is how Flutter can communicate with the systems, to make that happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test this out, and I have a phone number, which is Chris's, so you can take it down and ring him.
Number.
You clearly didn't get the text from last night. And so we are going to try this out.
Okay, so now hundreds of my new closest friends can feel free to call me whenever you like. Maybe at 2 in the morning, you've got a burning Flutter question. Hey, Chris, how do I make this work?
And this is an American phone with a UK SIM sitting in Spain, so it takes a few seconds to go through. Did I get your number right?
Hello, Mobile World Congress.
There we go. I think that's working.
Excellent.
And there we go. So there you go. So that was a dialer in Flutter, mostly written from scratch with a few bits and pieces in 16 minutes and 52 seconds.
Thank you very much, Matt. All right. So it was experiences like that that made me excited about Flutter. I've only been on the Flutter team for about 3 months, and it was actually sitting down and writing Flutter code and actually experiencing exactly the kinds of things Matt was showing for myself, building my own custom apps, getting up to speed quickly, being able to use hot reload, being able to actually write a single hunk of source code and have it go across multiple platforms. That's my real experiences. And I called up the team, and they had a spot for me, and now I work for Flutter. I mean, that was pretty great for me. So I was explaining all of this to another friend of mine, a software engineer at another large software company. And I was telling him how great this was, and I could write my code once and have it work across multiple platforms, Android and iOS. And he looked at me and he said, "Isn't that a solved problem? Can't you already do that?" And I said, well, sure. And there's 2 main ways to do this, right? You can write 2 apps. You can have 2 teams and write 2 apps, one from Android, one from iOS. And that gives you the good chance at good performance, and it gives you access to the native APIs, but you have 2 teams, and you have 2 code bases. And it's easy for the features to get out of sync, and for the branding to get out of sync. And over time, and we hear this from our customers, the apps get out of sync with each other. Okay? That actually happens. The other way to do it, of course, is there are existing cross-platform frameworks. Right? You can write your code often in JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and those are easy technologies. A lot of us are familiar with those style of technologies. We can pick those up. But when you do that and you actually deploy to production environments, you have some problems. When you're trying to maintain 60 frames per second with tearing or scrolling or garbage collection or jank or animation problems, you have these problems. And so the idea of Flutter is that it is meant to be the best of both, to take the native performance and quality and the high velocity developer experience and combine that with the ability to get to multiple platforms. Okay? And so we're going to talk about how Flutter enables that, right? How Flutter as a modern UI framework makes this happen. We're going to start by talking about its architecture. We're going to talk about what it means to be declarative and composable and reactive. We're going to talk about how it works well across multiple platforms with a rich ecosystem, how it has first-class tooling and community support, and we're also going to talk about its open source nature and the benefits you get as developers using open source. Okay? That's what we're going to talk about. So, of course, any architecture we want it to be layered. We don't want it to be intermixed. We want it to be easy. If there's anything that we want to do to extend Flutter, either on top by building our apps, or in the middle by forking it or adding functionality in between, that you can do that. Okay? So at the bottom of the architecture is the engine, and this is built in C++ code. It's meant to be the fastest possible thing it can be. So it's built at the low level to do drawing and low-level rendering, and we also have the Dart runtime and jitter at that bottom level. Okay? Now on top of that, everything else is built with Dart. Okay? When Matt was actually digging through and saying, hey, I looked up the source code in Visual Studio Code for one of the core Flutter widgets, he was showing you the actual source code. Okay, the source code that's available on GitHub, and you can take a look at, and it's heavily commented with documentation, so you can understand and extend it whenever you want. And so those are the kinds of things like animation and rendering and widgets and our set of components, and we'll talk more about those in a minute. On top of that is a set of plugins and packages. And those could be written in pure Dart, or it could be a mix of Dart and Java, a mix of Dart and Kotlin, a mix of Dart, Java, and iOS code, Swift, or Objective-C. The idea being that you can have these plugins that have the native code in them with a Dart API, so that you can add them to your app and call them from your app and not have to worry about the native code. And we have a rich ecosystem. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay? On the side, we have a number of tools. Matt mentioned Visual Studio Code. That's his preference. But we also have Android Studio and IntelliJ support, deep integration with all three of those IDEs. You saw the Dart Dev Tools, which is brand new for Flutter 1.2. We also have a full range of command line tools, as well as at its core, if you're running Dart, you're running an analysis server. And this is what provides the language services across all of these IDEs. And then we also have a ahead-of-time compiler. And you might be wondering, what possible use could we have for a just-in-time compiler and an ahead-of-time compiler? Why do we have both? We have both so that we get the best of both worlds. While Matt was writing his code, he was running a development build. He was running in a Dart VM using the just-in-time compiler so that when he was making changes and pressing the save button, those changes were sent over the just-in-time compiler, and they were just-in-time compiled. So that's why you get that sub-second reload with the state intact. However, when you want the fastest possible speed in a native environment, you don't want a VM in the way. What you want is native code. And so that's what the ahead-of-time compiler provides. When you target Android and iOS specifically, that's what you get, the performance. No matter which way you go, you are going to get optimized runtime for building client UIs. Flutter builds a ton of objects. Every time you make a change, and we'll see how this works, when you make a change that causes a re-render, you're going to get a new subtree of widgets. That's a set of objects. If it's a big subtree, it'll be a big set of objects. And if you're doing this 60 frames a second, it'll be a lot of objects being created and destroyed. Dart is optimized for that. Dart as a platform and as a language is optimized for building client-side UI. Okay? Great. Now, when it comes to features of a modern UI framework, first and foremost, we want something to be declarative. This is something that we have from the web. Traditionally, before the web, when we wanted to, say, lay out something like what we have on the right there, we'd say, okay, we have an image, and it starts in the upper left, and it has a certain amount of width, and it has a certain height, and then the thing that comes under it, we offset it, and we lay out that, and we calculate all those numbers, and we lay it out ourselves. That's not how I want to spend my day. Okay? With a declarative layout, what you do is you say, hey, I've got a parent widget, and I've got some child widgets, and I'll tell you how much space they need and what their layout constraints are, and then you figure it out. Right? That's what we want from Flutter. We want Flutter to figure it out. So we declare our intent, and Flutter does all of that offsets and all those positions for us. Okay? So here's an example of code that Matt was showing, right? Start at the top, work your way down. Here we've got some custom widgets we're in the middle of creating that each one can easily map to the set of things happening on the right. Okay? You can look at your UI and write the code. All right. Now Matt said, hey, everything is widgets. He spent all this time bringing in widgets. He wanted a row here, a column there. Okay? We have architected Flutter to have a large number of small widgets. Those small widgets are easy to understand and easy to compose in different ways that we've never thought of. Okay? What they do is they make it easy for you to combine them in ways that you need to make your app work. And it encourages both you and third parties that you get widgets from to build small, composable, reusable widgets that make it easy to understand and easy to reuse. Okay? That's how we've architected it. All right. I see we have a hand raised for a question, which is good. I like to inspire questions. We are going to have a panel afterwards where we're going to answer all those questions. Great. Okay. All right. And again, this idea of widgets all the way down. You might have seen these words on my slides earlier, the difference between material and Cupertino. We have two main family of widgets that are styled for material design or for the iOS Apple design language, which we call Cupertino. Okay? It's the set of widgets that look and feel like material widgets or iOS widgets. Okay? You can mix and match them. They work just fine together. You can decide that you want your Flutter app to look like one or the other, depending on what platform it happens to be running on. You can decide, and this is what we see a lot of our customers deciding, that we want our app to have its own unique look and feel, a branded look that looks the same and works the same across multiple platforms. Okay? Doesn't matter. All fully themable. You saw how easy it was for Matt to add shadows or change colors or add gradients or change a box to an underline, change the icons. It's all that easy. You have full control. You can make it look exactly how you want it to look. Okay. We also want it to be reactive. Modern UI frameworks are reactive. Well, what does that mean? The idea of a reactive framework is sometimes your widgets are stateless. They are completely composed by the parameters that come in. Okay? Sometimes, however, parameters have state. Matt showed this when he showed that his number box had state in it, right? It was showing what the current number was, right, as the user dialed. Okay. When a widget has state and that state changes, the widget needs to update the view of itself. But it doesn't go and say, okay, draw. Or it doesn't do what the old style UI frameworks used to do, which is, oh, this part of my UI is now invalid, wait for some kind of a message and paint that rectangle. We don't do any of that. All we do when we're going to change some state, for example, here we've got a like button, and we've got, is that button currently liked or not? And then when we have our build method, which it provides this widget of components that make up this button, when we set the color, is it liked, red, or white? Okay? We just use the state to compose how that widget looks. Now, when the user clicks on that control, we want to change whatever it was to be the other thing, but we want to do it in this set state. And set state is a signal to Flutter that the state associated with this widget has changed. And so it gathers up all of the set state notifications, and it's synchronized to make sure that it's drawing as fast as it can, so it bundles some of them up together as much as it can. And then it goes to the widgets and say, oh, I understand you have a new layout. And it calls the build method. And then the widget just says, oh, well, here's what my layout is. That means that you as a widget author only have to worry about the state, both of the static state that came in when you were built as parameters and the dynamic state that can change during the lifetime of the widget, and use that to figure out what your widget looks like. You don't have to worry about, is this the first time this widget is called? Is this the second time when I have to make minimal updates? And the reason you don't have to do that is because Flutter, when it reacts to the set state call, will gather up what you give it in the build method and then compare it to what's already on the screen and come up with the smallest possible delta to make the change. That's how you achieve that fast redraw, right? That 60 frames a second. Okay? Because Flutter is aware of what's going on, and it does all that heavy lifting, and you just have to say, in this state, here's what my component looks like, and Flutter will react to that. Okay? Great. So, what does it mean to be multi-platform? Well, we know today that Flutter supports, out of the box, as of December, in production release, Android and iOS. How does it do that? It does it with something called the embedding API. The idea is that most of Flutter is completely agnostic to the platform it's running on. But at the very bottom level, there has to be a mapping that says, oh, I want to draw a pixel on the screen. That happens differently on Android versus iOS versus something else. Okay? Plus, oh, there's an event, right? Somebody touched something, or somebody moved a mouse, or clicked on a keyboard, right? Those kinds of things are platform specific. So there has to be a mapping. That mapping is called the embedded API. And what we've done at the Flutter team is provide implementations for both Android and iOS. We're also experimenting with implementations for desktop, for Windows and Mac and Linux. And we're experimenting with implementations for the web, with the idea that if you had those, you could just say, I've got my Flutter code, and I want to target it at whatever embedding API I happen to care about, okay? Or whatever implementation. As one example, one member of the Flutter community happened to really like Raspberry Pis, so they built an embedded API implementation for the Raspberry Pi. If you want to take your Flutter app and point it at a Raspberry Pi, today you can do that. Right? You don't have to wait for Google to implement that embedding API. You can do it yourselves. Okay, great. So that's one way we support multi-platforms. Another way we support multi-platforms is once your app is running, you need to be able to call APIs sometimes. When Matt was making his dialer, he had a nice little dial button. In the background, that dial button had to do different things based on whether it was running in Android or whether it was running on iOS. Because how you dial, there's just different code, and you bind to different libraries, right? That's just how that goes, okay? The way we do that in Flutter is we do something called a platform channel. The idea of a platform channel is this is your Dart code that sends a message to some listener, and that listener is going to change based on whether you're running on Android or iOS. If you're running on Android, it's the Android listener, and it will take that message and call the right native API and package up the response and send it back. If it happens to be running on iOS, you'll have the iOS listener, and it will do the same. Okay? Whenever you want to get to the native APIs on whatever platform you want to target, you can do so via platform channels. Okay? Now, that platform channel idea has led to a whole ecosystem of plugins. Because the idea of a plugin is Dart code plus platform-specific code for one or more platforms. Okay? A package, a regular old Dart package, is just Dart code, right? But a plugin is a Flutter piece of Flutter code that can target the native platform using those platform channels. And so if you want to write that native code, you can. But if you don't want to, you can just go to that URL right there and type in a search word and see if one of the 1,400 components that's already there serves your needs. And the Flutter team has put a bunch up there, and other members of Google have put a bunch there, and there's some great ones from the Flutter community, and Square has built one. Right? And Firebase has built one. A couple of new ones that are pretty popular, the web view, being able to host a browser inside your Android or iOS app, or Maps. Okay? The things you would expect from Google are up in that list. Okay? Great. So, what about tooling? What about the community itself? Well, as Matt mentioned, we support Android Studio and IntelliJ and VS Code. It used to be, before today, that Android Studio and IntelliJ got a little more love. That cool inspector code that Matt was showing, that only ran inside of Android Studio and IntelliJ. But as of today, with the Flutter 1.1 or 1.2 release, we've made it available as a separate standalone application so that if you happen to be using Visual Studio Code, we've integrated that. It works just fine. Or if you want to use it from the command line, you can do it that way as well. So you can use whatever editors, whatever IDE your little heart desires. We support them all. Okay? We also saw Martin showing off Code Magic. I'm a big fan, right? Being able to, it's so amazing, being able to make a change to your GitHub and then boom, magic happens, right? That's where that term comes from. Excellent. All right. Also, if you haven't seen Flare by 2 Dimensions, this is a standalone animation tool where you can build animations and see timelines and watch things go and tweak things and bring in your graphics and all the things that you expect your designers to do with their animation tools. But then you save the file and you pull it up in your Flutter code. Okay? And you have these interactive experiences in your Flutter code. Okay? All right. As I mentioned, we have the IDEs, but if you don't like the IDEs, you can feel free to use the terminal. All that functionality is available from the command line. We like everyone on the Flutter team. As I mentioned also, Flutter is open source, fully open source. All the stuff, that whole architecture, all the stuff I showed you on there, it's all open source. Feel free. We have hundreds of contributors, lots of which make significant contributions. In fact, several of the features that we're announcing today in Flutter 1.2 come directly from third-party contributors, not just the Flutter team. Okay? And in terms of momentum, we've shipped the 1.0, as I mentioned, in December. We've already doubled the number, almost doubled the number of developers in that time, in 10 weeks. It has been amazing. to watch the growth of the number of developers on Flutter. We've seen a 40% increase in the number of plugins, Flutter-specific packages and plugins. We're in the top 20 now on GitHub when it comes to stars. We're right nestled nicely between Node and Go, which is a pretty nice place to be for a pretty young project. I won't say which one we're ahead of. I'll let you look that up. Thousands of apps in both app stores. And great community support. If you want to get started, Reddit, Stack Overflow, the chat apps that you might like, right? Where you want to ask questions, where you want to get questions answered, all of that. Flutter.dev/community is a fabulous place to start, as well as startflutter.com, flutter.institute, online training that you can just use right today to learn Flutter. And they'll take you step by step through what it takes to be a Flutter developer. And of course, I mentioned open source. And not just open source, but open source with frequent updates. And of course, I mentioned a couple of times Flutter 1.2, which comes with a number of framework features, including animation easing functions and Android app bundle support. And as I mentioned, those are from third parties. Right? Those don't come from the Flutter team. Okay, 2 big features. New Cupertino theme that gives you even more control, and keyboard and mouse input as we expand Flutter's reach, for example, to building great tablet apps or great Chrome OS apps where mouse and keyboard is a part of the input and not just touch. We're building that right into the core of Flutter, and we've got more work to do there. We're doing a number of localizations. And from the tooling side, Matt already mentioned Dart Dev Tools. We are adding support for Java 1.8. And we've done a bunch of studies in terms of error messages. We found that with a little bit of user experience research, we've got an amazing UX team, by the way, on Flutter, that if we can change the format and the text of the exact same error messages you already get, we can make you something like 50% more effective in terms of actually being able to act on those error messages and fix them. That's amazing. So we are pushing on that, and we're going to continue to push on that. If we can make you more productive in any way, that's what we're going to do. Okay, and let me show you another couple of others. You saw Dart Dev Tools. Here's another one. We've noticed that a lot of folks like the samples that come with Flutter. But the way we've got them arranged right now, they're kind of embedded inside the Flutter repo itself. And that's great for us because it makes sure that when we change things, if there's problems and breaking changes, we see them in the samples. So we want to keep it that way. But it also makes it hard to extract if that's all you want is one sample as opposed to the entire Flutter source code base. So now we've made it so both within Visual Studio Code and Android Studio and IntelliJ, you can just create a new project. You can pick which sample you like and base your work on that sample. It's great for just looking at the sample and learning Flutter. It's a great base. Recommended. Another one, remember I said, hey, we like all the developers of all kinds. We want to support all IDEs. How many Vim programmers are in the room? Vim users? Couple? Uh-oh. Let me ask the other question. Emacs? I don't want to start a riot, right? Not everyone raised their hand. Is not everyone using either Vim or Emacs? Are you using something different? I assume. Yes, one person is using something different. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Anyway, for those of you who like Vim or other editors besides IntelliJ, Android Studio, or Visual Studio, we're actually releasing an alpha of a language server protocol implementation in this release so that you can plug it into your existing editors, even if we don't support them directly, with all that functionality, if you want to. And in this particular case, we happen to be reflecting an error message of some dead code, but we can do warnings and finding definitions and references and refactoring with renaming and all of the goodness that LSP provides, right? The idea being We want Flutter to be everywhere, and that includes developer tool support. All right. If I have excited you about Flutter as much as I am excited about Flutter, I would like to direct you to flutter.dev/create, the Flutter team's first coding contest. The goal is, how cool can you be in 5 kilobytes of dark code or less? Okay? And if you want to, remove the comments and, use really short variable names, I won't complain, right? Feel free. Okay? So check that out, the Flutter Create Challenge. I think the top prize is a monster Mac, like desktop huge Mac with a big monitor and all the trimmings. So if you're excited about Flutter, I definitely recommend this. That's what I had to say about Flutter. As always, flutter.dev is the place to start, and thank you very much for your time.